So I think we're going to try to get started. Is this mic on? I can't tell. Yes? Kind of, more or less? Okay. We're going to be starting today with making meaning in a multilingual world. Just by way of introduction, I'm Peter from the Google Cultural Institute. And Tristan will be telling us all about the difficulties and opportunities when it comes to cataloging data in many, many languages.
Okay, thank you, Peter. So just a quick intro. My name is Tristan. I work for an agency based in the UK. We're called CogApp. We've done a lot of work with museums over the years. We've also created a lot of multilingual websites over the years. And in particular, recently, I've been working on a lot of projects that are dual language, Arabic and English. So I'll be talking about some of those and some of the challenges. So I've only got one slide to try and convince you why. Really, the point is that English, although it's a predominant language that we're all speaking, it certainly isn't in the world. So out of, in a worldwide population, there's only 12% who have English as any language, and that's less than 5% who have it as a first language as well. And even in the USA, again, it's the lingua franca, but actually, there's only 80% of residents of the USA have English as a first language, and the graph on the right there shows the other languages in use. Furthermore, that proportion is growing. If we look at the 2013 census data, then there was only 1 in 11 people had non-English as a first language in 1980. That's climbed to 1 in 5 now. So effectively, by considering the needs of people who don't have English as a first language, you get to increase your reach, increase engagement, both nationally and, crucially, internationally. So you're convinced, I hope. How does it all work? In a word, Unicode. This is a solved problem. Computers know how to store the information required to represent all languages in the world. So, yay, that's great, and A-OK. And of course, you'll recognize those as the Unicode characters U+1 for FFD, and so on. All of these symbols and more are encoded and available. Talking quickly about sort of the back-end systems, where do you get your data from? So if you're running an online collection, you're going to be extracting it from your collections management system, putting it online. The good news is that but all the major systems are fully multilingual now. TMS switched to using Unicode natively in TMS 2012. That furthermore, their editing interface, their taxonomies and so on are now fully multilingualizable, and multi-MIMS is as well. Then you've got to make sure that anyone dealing with this stuff really understands it. So in a nutshell, Unicode itself is sort of a conceptual idea. When it comes to getting stored in computers, that's when it becomes tangible, and that's when you need to start understanding things like encoding schemes such as UTF-8 and similar. There's a great article. It's from 2003, but it's still relevant every day, even now. And there's a link to all of these in the slides, which I'll be putting up on SlideShare. You've also got to make sure that any system you use to handle the data knows how to handle Unicode properly. And in particular, when we were looking at developing a processing system for Arabic text, we realized that Python 2 has effectively a broken model of Unicode support. It tries to be too helpful, and this can lead to all sorts of problems. And so we made sure that all of our software is compatible with Python 3 that solves that. There's a good link to an article there that explains the differences. And effectively also talks about the software development technique of creating a Unicode sandwich. What you want to do is, at the moment of input, you know what character sets are being used, you convert it natively to Unicode, and you make sure that everything is passed around entirely as Unicode within your processing systems before, at the very last possible moment, converting it out again to a character set for display. So websites, you've got the back-end data that might come from your collections management system. You also have sort of contextual information, articles, website opening times, things like museum opening times, things like that. That tends to be stored in a collections management system. So the one we use most at CogApp is Drupal. And the good news is it has excellent multilingual support, and that's getting even better in Drupal 8. Drupal 7, you can definitely create multilingual websites, but you often have to use a lot of third-party modules. With Drupal 8, the very idea of multilingualism is sort of baked into the core of the system, and what that should mean is that the situation will only get better going forward, because what we found is where things come to a screeching halt is that although the core Drupal system considers multilingualism as a essential feature, third-party modules don't have to honour this, and often you'll find that something that you've been using happily for years to present English information online suddenly fails when you start considering multiple languages. So the Drupal, as well as sort of being able to display information in multiple languages, allows editors to work in multiple languages, and the core of Drupal has all been translated. So here's an example here on the right-hand side. We've got an Arabic editing interface, and you can see things like the title and the language have both been translated. More specific things like teaser text, teaser image, those are custom things available to just created for the system, but those again can be translated through the web, and there's a very easy way for translators to go through, identify untranslated text, and then update them. And in fact, working with the British Library, they've updated thousands of strings and contributed this back to the Drupal community. So a few things you need to consider. There's some decisions to be made. Do you have a fallback language? If a page is available in English but not in any other language, what's the behavior? Do you omit it from your navigation? Do you provide the information there in English? Equally, you need to consider anything else as well as the content itself, anything used to categorize that content. So categories, taxonomies, and so on need to be translated. And finally, sort of a new thing, but it's very useful, is URLs themselves can now be Unicode, and you can indeed provide information in the native language within the URL, and you can indeed have Unicode domain names as well. So in a sense, going forward, everything can become more compatible with speakers of other languages. You need to think about the workflow, so how you're actually going to produce this information. And this is really a sort of a thorny organizational problem, is often you'll be set up for just producing monolingual content, but in a sense, as soon as you move to one or more languages, then you need to make sure that every single scrap of text goes through a translation workflow. There's some tools that can help you. So in Drupal, the translation management tool aims to provide a sort of workbench and help translators to work out what needs translating and putting online. There's, as well as in-house translation systems, there's third-party services. So Lingotech, for example, is an international company. They have pools of translators, and then crucially they have sort of a machine interface and Drupal integration where you can actually use their service to provide those translations. And then there's other projects. So one mentioned there is a Transiflex. It's done purely through using JavaScript calls to retrieve the translations. And that's free for any open source project. So again, if you're creating any open source systems, then it's worth investigating. So now, once we've talked about how to get the language into the systems we're going to use, I'm now going to talk all about how to get it out. So, and in particular, the problems with languages such as Arabic, where it's read in the opposite direction. So they read from right to left instead of left to right. Again, this is a solved problem. The W3C consortium have come up with this as part of the HTML specification. There's a dir attribute that can be put on any element, and this RTL, it means display all the text in this block as right to left. There's also inbuilt Unicode markers that says I'm a left to right marker or a right to left marker, and those can also be represented with the HTML entity there. So, here's an example of kind of both of those. On the left-hand side there, you've got the Arabic text as displayed. On the right-hand side, it's probably a bit small to see, but we've got an HTML span element which has a direction left to right, because actually some of these characters, the punctuation marks and so on, are actually, although they're comprehensible in Arabic, they come from English, Western, Latin text. And so again, there's a case of you need to start mixing left to right and right to left within the flow of the document itself. So in terms of displaying it online, CSS, you can change the floating, the direction of everything, because essentially the whole interface needs to switch over as well as the text direction itself. And the top tip here would be to use an CSS preprocessor such as SAS or less, because it allows you to sort of easily mix in the different the layouts that you require. So again, hard to see probably from a distance, but these will be available online. On the left-hand side, we've got the normal footer SAS file, and on the right-hand side, we've got the extra include that we use if it is using a right-to-left language as well. The upshot of all of this is effectively it allows you to produce layouts that switch completely. So here's a screenshot from the Qatar Museum's website. You see the English on the left, the Arabic on the right, and effectively everything has reversed there, the image ordering, the layouts, the search buttons in the header, and so forth. There's also, even apart from text, there's often differences and things that sort of we didn't really consider at the outset, and that is that in Arabic, or at least certain parts of the Arab world, they don't use the number system that we use. We use Western Arabic numerals, the ones on the right there in the chart. They use Eastern Arabic numerals, which effectively, again, have different representations. So what this means, even if your content management system is translated and the information from your collections management system, there's still odd situations where, for example, at the bottom left there showing the search results page, it's showing 1 to 10 of 595,000 items. Again, to display that with high fidelity in Arabic, you need to also run all those numbers through a translation function to get them to use Eastern Arabic numerals as well. With images, effectively avoid text in images if you possibly can. Now, this is a good thing for accessibility reasons anyway, but it's certainly something that it becomes even more essential if you're dealing with multilingual text. You should also look at reversing image ordering, and there's two examples here, again, slightly hard to see, but in the English version, it's the Qatar National Library in partnership with British Library. And again, it's a tiny fragment of text, but suddenly it needs translating, it needs reversing, and it needs displaying online. This is easy to do nowadays. With modern HTML, what we've got is examples, sort of two versions of the Qatar Museum's homepage, the English on the left, Arabic on the right, and all of that text there, that's live text rather than GIF text. It's not embedded in the images. And what this means is that you can still create visually impactful layouts. The Arabic font on the right, again, it's a very stylized font and conforms to the brand identity, but we're not actually putting any of this stuff in the images themselves. I suppose that the one exception, the one time we have sort of deliberately used images was when we were dealing with constrained systems. So in this case, we created a kiosk for the Tate in London, who were running an exhibition from Chinese artist Ai Weiwei. And there, when it came to laying out the Chinese text, we deliberately did use images because we knew the systems that would be displayed. And what that meant is it freed us up from having to make sure that the correct fonts were installed on any of the machines. We knew that our system was sort of standalone and would work on any device. So again, fonts, beware web fonts. So web fonts are great in that it vastly increases the use of typography online. However, you've got to be very careful about unsupported characters. So for example, here we've got mixed language text in the title. So we've got the English text, but also the Arabic text. There's a quick aside, something we realize here, that you'll see the arrow on the right-hand side is grayed out, on the left-hand side is live. So even though we're looking at the English interface here, because we're looking at an Arabic manuscript that has a reading order of right to left, then everything gets swapped around there. So there's sort of wheels within wheels when it comes to reading order and things like that for how things should be correctly displayed online. But anyway, we're displaying mixed language text in the title. This is the website as viewed in Chrome. We're using a web font called Gotham Rounded for the English text. It's correctly displaying the Arabic text as well there. this is the same page in Internet Explorer. So these are the kind of things you only discover after a while, after test. So testing would be another big tip, don't assume that things will just work in other languages. Make sure you actively test them. In this case, it's one particular version of IE, just didn't like it at all, the mixture of, in particular, Arabic text displaying with the Gotham rounded font. So in the end, we had to, for that version of IE, fall back to a web-safe font. And then even sort of within displaying Latin text, you'll find there are problems. So with Arabic, and in this case with Yiddish that's using Hebrew text to represent it, we employ transliteration. You're taking foreign words, but you're displaying them using a Roman, a Western character set, according to a set of rules for how to translate that. So we can see Leo Tolstoy there. We've got dots under the T's there, which again has a particular meaning for the pronunciation of that word. These generally, the general term for these are called diacritics. And again, what we found is these themselves can cause problems. There's a blog article we published about sort of the way to get around this, but effectively the spoiler for it is that the Unicode composed characters can be handled a lot better and more consistently than decomposed characters. The other thing is beware fonts in general. So here's the sort of the brand guidelines for the Qatar National Library. They specify an Arabic font of GESS2, and this again, it's a very stylized font, and the recommendation was display all of this. However, when you test it with native speakers, what they say is that this stuff, when seen in bulk online, actually gets quite illegible. So it's fine for sort of bold titles and so on, but you don't want to try and read huge chunks of it. And so in the end, in fact, when it came to displaying online, especially for long articles, here's an article about US propaganda in Bahrain after the Second World War, if you're interested. There we switch back to a web-safe font. We're just using the default Arial to display the Arabic text. So pretty much that's it. In conclusion, what can you get at the end? Well, here's an example for the Tate. We put thousands of videos online, again, fully bilingual in Chinese. Here's a site for the Kubatar collection of kimonos displaying in Russian. Here, again, the homepage of the Qatar Digital Library, fully translated into Arabic and linking through to all the features using the same presentation as the English version. A sample page from Qatar museums, and again here we're starting to embed Twitter feeds and things like that. But again, the predominant language is Arabic, and basically this is it. There's we're creating a lot of multilingual content online, hundreds and hundreds of articles. It's growing all the time, and I would encourage all of you to join in that drive and to release information for audiences who are non-English speakers. Whoops. So basically, the last slide just said questions. So I think there we go. So thank you very much.
So questions from the audience first. Anything yet? Okay. You mentioned some.
Quick question.
In the back.
I was wondering if you had a sense of sort of what common browser use, your Internet Explorer, for example, sort of around the world outside of the US.
The answer is it varies, and it varies quite a lot. And in a way, the only real metrics that are worth it is the target institution itself. So, for example, when working with both organizations in Qatar, one of the first things we did was to get the web stats from their previous sites or from related sites from that region, and then look at the Google Analytics numbers and tailor our testing accordingly.
So you mentioned some workflow systems in terms of third-party services that can help with this.
Mm-hmm.
Have you worked with any institutions that try to do the translations in-house, and what departments kind of contributed those?
Yeah, so we've worked with the British Library, and effectively they use a mixture. So for the translation of the bulk of their archive data, so they'll have their archivists creating detailed descriptions. They will then be handed off to a third party in actual XML format and come back in XML format, and those are imported straight in. But they also have an in-house team of Arabic speakers who are responsible for producing the translations of the articles part of the section of the site. So effectively, they do mix and match the two. What I would say is, if you're doing any sort of significant scale of translation, it's well worth having somebody in-house who is a native speaker, firstly for quality assurance, if nothing else, but also to be able to do those quick changes. So when it's like we create a new web page and suddenly there's a click to see more scrap of text, you want to be able to turn that around very quickly and get the change online.
Because I imagine without that, you're pretty much at the mercy of the quality assurance from those third parties without the native speakers in-house.
Absolutely, yes. But again, in practice, if you are going to be developing a multilingual website, then there's almost certainly an internal person who is going to be driving that and responsible for that as well.
So any kind of design considerations thinking about mobile devices or in particular very long or short text strings that might not work well with the current design scheme?
Yeah, that's a very good point, and that's definitely a design constraint. I mean, I would say, we find that in general, just with English text, it's kind of thing you can't really give people a design that says, you've got 200 characters for a teaser text, and if you go one character over, the whole site is going to break. So what we try to do is always accommodate the idea of variable length. And I don't know if it was visible on any of the examples there, but for actually maybe it is. Oh no, sorry. So here we've got sort of teaser text underneath, or their title text underneath, where we're effectively just displaying that string, but we know, if it went down, it would push the whole line down. For other things where we've got long teaser text, what we tend to do is, rather than try and truncate it with enforced ellipses or anything else, is now just sort of fade it out, so that if they do go over the limit, then you don't see the full teaser text on the teaser page, but then when you get to the page itself, it's repeated as an intro paragraph to the article.
I tend to work with a lot of smaller and mid-sized museums that don't have the in-house expertise to do API or SQL data extraction, or even sometimes an XML without a lot of custom tools to pull stuff out of, say, Perfect and other collection management systems. And so I'm wondering if you have any advice on what some of the best practices might be for getting those institutions to input data in a way that might make it a bit easier, because our SQL and sometimes even Excel extractions tend to explode when we try to put them back into the website.
So, I mean, in a way, if the question is about sort of multilingual content, then the key thing would be to make sure that, in a way, this is natively supported by your collections management system, because in a way, if it isn't, you're going to be jumping through all sorts of hoops, and it's probably harder to do that than it is to actually look at migrating to a different system.
They are supported. It's just extracting the data. Stuff tends to get munged in the middle.
Okay, so there again, the trouble is, sort of as I was saying, it's making sure that the tools you use support it, and the developers who implement those tools understand, in a way, the complexities of character encoding and decoding. There is no easy answer, unfortunately. It's a case of sort of realizing at every point, being explicit about what the character encodings are used at every point, be it in the database, be it in transition, like pulled out into intermediate formats like CSV or anything similar, and then finally on display when they're pushed out to the website or pushed into another web format database rather than the back-end format database. It's just it's a hard problem, and you just have to know categorically what is happening at each step to be able to solve any problems that occur in terms of garbling as it goes along.
So you mentioned TMS and MIMSI. How would you say in other DAMs and CMS systems, internationalization and multilingual support? I mean, how is it fairly well supported across the field, or?
I'm afraid I don't know. So in a way, the one big project where we've been using a large amount of multilingual data, it's already been sort of pre-processed and come out of a system as XML in Unicode format in UTF-8. I looked up that information for MIMSI and TMS, but we've never had to actively extract from there or any other equivalent DAM. So, you know, this is probably a question for the audience rather than for me, I'm afraid.
So join me again in thanking Tristan.
Great, thank you.
And we get to find out about another very popular
The board will reach.
project.
I would love it.
It's not on at all.
Okay. Thank you.
It had an on-off switch. That would be great. Does that one work? Can we try that one really quick?
It might be on.
Hello. It does work.
All right. It's on now. Very low. We'll be moving on to a conversation about open source solutions, specifically in DAMs, talking about collection space. So Kate, Josh, and Andrew from, Kate from the Walters and Josh and Andrew from MIA.
ResourceBase.
ResourceBase.
There's a lot of spaces.
A lot of spaces.
You can have collections in ResourceBase.
You could, yeah. All right. Do you want to just get started, or do you want to wait for a minute?
Oh, we're a little early,
A
are we?
little early, yep.
I think we can get started, actually, because the conversation is going to be the most important part towards the end.
Sure. Hello, I'm Andrew David. We're here to talk about our open source solution to DAMs, which we're going to go ahead and get in. Our format for this particular conversation, we're going to do a little bit of an intro, and then what we're going to do is talk about MIA's implementation of ResourceBase, and as well as like requirements and why we chose it, et cetera, and Walters will do the same thing. Come back together, talk a little bit about open source standards, sort of bridge both of us at this point, and do a discussion at the end. So again, I'm Andrew David, the head of software development at MIA. Josh.
I'm Josh Lynn. I'm the digital media specialist at MIA.
My name's Kate Blanche. I'm the systems manager for data and digital resources at the Walters Art Museum in Baltimore.
So talking about DAMs for MIA in particular, what we were actually talking about, and one of the reasons why we were actually looking for a particular system, our requirements are, when we did our evaluation for DAMs for this particular grant project, which I'll talk a little bit about, we were looking for something that, one, we can support in-house. PHP is our preferred language, so that eliminated several open source DAMs. We don't really have .NET developers. We don't do anything else with Java, for example, for support for even our back-end people. So it's a little bit of trying to pick and choose our battles, do what we're good at, and not try to learn something too open-heavy. We were looking for something that's scalable, that can actually handle lots of data without also scaling the costs too much. We were looking for a system that would actually allow us to try it before we were able to buy it, you know, actually give a chance of doing a fresh, clean installation, finding out what we can do. Hopefully having an API. We're very heavily using APIs in many different systems within MIA, so that's what we use as our sort of glue to stick things together. So we were clearly intentionally looking for a system which also supported the same thing. We aren't really in the user management business. We don't want to be too heavily, you know, dealing with our LDAP configurations and getting really deeply in terms of how to manage all that content. We just want the people who are meant to use the system to be able to get into the system and actually, you know, modify, do whatever else they actually need to do. But most importantly, we're also looking for a flexible metadata model. We're looking for a system that is driven by metadata, because when we attach important salient bits of information to content, we want to make sure that it comes back out. We want to be able to use that data when it's in it so that our little robots can actually move content around, just based on what metadata has actually been applied to the assets. So in our process for actually choosing ResourceBase for this project, we went through, I think, probably about 20 or so digital DAM systems that we looked at, ranging all the way into like video production. I think we looked at some asset systems that were there. Going down the list of actually doing installations of most of these, determining those requirements that I mentioned earlier and how well actually things fit into it. The reason we went with ResourceBase is because obviously it met all of our hard requirements, and some of the other things we enjoyed was it actually maintains the metadata within the system, and it also uses another open source tool which allows you to manipulate it. Extensible, it's PHP, it's open source, so anything that it didn't do, we were actually able to do. It's heavily plugin oriented, so if you don't have a function or you need to replace other functions, you can actually just write a plugin for it, replace that function instead of have to battle with the interface. Scalable, it can basically scale. I don't think we've even seen a limit at this point in terms of storage. That's your only limiting factor, is how much disk space you actually have for the system. It hasn't choked on anything in terms of content. We are currently actually using it. The purpose for this, we actually got an IMLS grant for what's called the ECM Project, is what we called it internally. That project, as an IMLS funded project, was to try to create something that we can radiate back to the public to say, all this knowledge that we've actually learned about open source and about ResourceBase and about enterprise content management in general, we wanted to be able to give back. But for us, in order for this to actually be useful, we have a commercial dams on site. So we didn't want to make this the goal to replace that dams and say that there's only one way to do this. We were going for a system that would pick up the slack. So documents that sit on people's hard drives that we're not collecting, images, maps, PDF documents, things like that just don't really have a home. That's what we're actually using ResourceBase for. It's basically anything that's not within TMS or MediaBin, which is our current commercial dams. Transparent license fees. Anytime I see, contact us for pricing, I head for the hills. So we're looking for somebody who's free. ResourceBase itself is actually free. But we did have the option to actually go through paid support through Montala, which is like a backup just in case we couldn't actually get what we needed done. So implementing ResourceBase at MIA, almost all of our servers are actually Amazon EC2 instances. So we can spin up test instances almost immediately, do an upgrade, for example, which we recently just did. From the grant proposal, we also made sure that in the project, when we did it, we spec'd out to have a developer come in. We are a busy year. In case you guys were there last night, it's our 100th birthday year. We knew it was going to coincide with a lot of work that we had to get done, so we basically spec'd out to have a developer come in and just work with us as part of our team for a period of time to complete it. We are an agile shop, so we do daily Scrum sessions. That developer was part of our project, so all the knowledge that was transferred directly to the team as the developer was working on it. Let me see. We also seeded it with some content. We decided not to go digging too far into the back for like our design and editorial of things that were like 20 years old. We initially were going to try to do that until we looked at it. We said, there's just a little bit too much content. So we're trying to take the approach that we're going to go move forward. Any new content that's created is going to be made available in the system, trying to train people into saying, now, once you've produced something that's final that we can share, put it into the system and it'll actually live there. We did choose paid support with Montala, as I mentioned. And we mostly modified the metadata, which Josh will actually speak to a little bit more. We also did create a couple plugins that we published. They're out on GitHub. We replaced the uploader screen, modified the search within ResourceBase. We created a TMS API plugin, which is, it's kind of nuanced. We actually have an API for our internal stuff, which is a reflection of TMS. That system is integrated into our version of ResourceBase. So essentially you can take all the metadata within TMS and apply it to an asset within ResourceBase if it's related. What other plugins did we do? We created a new LDAP plugin, which allows you to basically just do the pass-through authentication. And
Customize the way that it plays with video?
Oh yeah, we did. We actually replaced the Flash video player that's in ResourceBase. We replaced it with HTML5 and actually give you the ability to play directly in, and it's actually HTML5, so it's supported on mobile. It actually works. The other things that we did with the system was we created an Elasticsearch plugin for it. So what it will do is any asset within ResourceBase that's been modified or uploaded will automatically get pumped right into our Elasticsearch engine. So it's live, which we actually use for another system, which was part of ECM, that we call MetaMia, which if I get a chance to talk about a little bit later, I will. That's also an open source project. That's more of like a unified search interface across all of our systems within MIA.